The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Air Station as Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell finished her pre-flight inspection. Her hands moved with practiced precision over the control surfaces of the FA-18 Super Hornet, checking every detail that could mean the difference between life and death at 30,000 feet. The other pilots in her squadron had already gathered in the briefing room, their voices carrying across the tarmac in the crisp morning air. Sarah had been flying combat missions for 3 years now, but today felt different. Word had spread through the base like wildfire that a special operations team would be joining their mission briefing. Navy SEALs didn't usually work directly with fighter pilots unless something big was happening, the kind of big that made experienced military personnel speak in hushed tones and exchange knowing glances. As she walked toward the briefing room, Sarah caught sight of the SEAL team arriving in their unmarked vehicles. Even from a distance, their presence commanded attention. They moved with a fluid efficiency that spoke of countless hours of training and real-world experience. Their leader, a tall man with piercing eyes and weathered features, stepped out of the lead vehicle and surveyed the flight line with the calculating gaze of someone who had seen too much combat. Commander Jake Reynolds had been leading SEAL Team 7 for over a decade. His reputation preceded him wherever he went, and stories of his missions had become legend among special operations communities. He was known for his tactical brilliance, his unwavering dedication to his team, and his sometimes controversial methods of getting results. What wasn't widely known was his deep respect for the pilots who provided air support for his ground operations. The briefing room buzzed with nervous energy as pilots and SEALs filed in together. Sarah took her usual seat in the third row, her flight helmet resting on her lap. She noticed how the SEALs naturally positioned themselves with clear views of all exits, their eyes constantly scanning for potential threats even in this secure environment. It was a habit born from years of operating in hostile territory, where complacency could be fatal. Colonel Martinez, the base commander, called the room to attention as he entered with a folder, marked with the highest classification levels. The mission details were need to know, but what he could share painted a picture of a high-risk operation deep in enemy territory. Intelligence had located a high-value target who posed an immediate threat to American interests. The window of opportunity was narrow, and the margin for error was non-existent. Commander Reynolds stepped forward to address the room, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. He explained that his team would be conducting a nighttime insertion into hostile territory, where they would have limited time to complete their objective before extraction. The success of the mission depended heavily on precise air support and the ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. On the ground, the commander's eyes swept across the assembled pilots as he spoke about the challenges they would face. Enemy air defenses were sophisticated and well-positioned. Weather conditions would be marginal at best. The terrain was unforgiving, with limited options for emergency landings should something go wrong. He needed pilots who could think on their feet, who wouldn't hesitate when split-second decisions meant the difference between mission, success, and catastrophic failure. Sarah listened intently as Reynolds outlined the specific requirements for the air support element. The pilots would need to maintain precise timing while navigating through contested airspace. They would need to provide close air support in an urban environment where the distinction between combatants and civilians could be measured in meters. Most critically, they would need to be prepared for the unexpected complications that always arose when no plan survived first contact with the enemy. As the briefing continued, Sarah found herself mentally running through various scenarios and contingencies. Her training had prepared her for complex missions, but this operation pushed beyond the standard playbook. The integration between air and ground forces would need to be seamless, with communications flowing both ways in real time. Any breakdown in coordination could result in friendly fire incidents or missed opportunities to neutralize threats. The other pilots in the room were asking technical questions about fuel loads, weapons configurations, and communication protocols. Sarah noticed that Commander Reynolds answered each question with the detailed knowledge of someone who understood both sides of the air-ground equation. His responses revealed years of experience coordinating with various aircraft types in combat situations where precision and timing were absolutely critical. When Colonel Martinez asked for volunteers for the mission, several hands went up immediately. Sarah's hand was among them. though she kept her expression neutral and professional. She had volunteered for dangerous missions before, but something about Commander Reynolds' intensity and the classified nature of this operation suggested it would be unlike anything she had previously experienced. The selection process would be rigorous, involving additional briefings, compatibility assessments, and specialized training exercises. Not every pilot who volunteered would be chosen for the final mission roster. The SEALs would have input on which pilots they preferred to work with, based on their assessment of skill levels, decision-making abilities, and how well individuals performed under extreme pressure. As the initial briefing concluded, Sarah gathered her gear and prepared to return to her regular duties. The formal selection process wouldn't begin until the following day, giving everyone time to consider the commitment they were making. She knew that accepting this mission meant putting her life on the line in ways that went beyond routine combat operations. Walking back across the flight line, Sarah's mind was already processing the tactical challenges ahead. The mission would require split-second timing, perfect coordination, and the ability to adapt quickly when plans inevitably changed. She thought about the other pilots who had volunteered, wondering which of them would ultimately be selected and how they would work together as a cohesive unit supporting the SEAL team's objectives. The sun was higher now, and the base was coming fully alive with the sounds of military activity. Aircraft engines roared to life on distant runways, and ground crews moved purposefully between hangars and maintenance facilities. It was a normal day in many ways, but Sarah knew that everything was about to change. The mission ahead would test every skill she had developed and push her abilities to their absolute limits. The selection process began before dawn the next morning. Sarah arrived at the Flight Operations Center to find Commander Reynolds already reviewing pilot files with his senior team members. The SEALs had spent the night analyzing each volunteer's service record, mission history, and psychological evaluations. They were looking for more than just technical flying skills. They needed pilots who could remain calm under extreme pressure and make sound decisions when lives hung in the balance. Sarah joined the other volunteers in a secure conference room where they received their first real glimpse into the mission's complexity. The target was a terrorist leader who had been planning attacks against American facilities overseas. Intelligence sources had pinpointed his location to a compound in a densely populated urban area, making precision strikes both necessary and extremely challenging. Collateral damage wasn't just unacceptable from a moral standpoint. It could trigger international incidents that would have far-reaching political consequences. Commander Reynolds explained that his team would infiltrate the compound under cover of darkness, but they would need immediate air support if the situation deteriorated rapidly. The pilots selected for this mission would need to loiter in hostile airspace for extended periods, ready to provide precision strikes with minimal warning. Enemy surface-to-air missile systems were known to be in the area, making the aircraft vulnerable to attack while maintaining their holding patterns. The first phase of selection involved intensive flight simulations that pushed each pilot to their limits. Sarah found herself in scenarios where split-second decisions determined whether simulated friendlies lived or died. The computer-generated environments were based on real intelligence about the target area, complete with accurate terrain features, building layouts, and known defensive positions. Every detail had been carefully programmed to reflect the actual conditions they would face during the mission. What made these simulations particularly challenging was the integration with the SEAL team's requirements. Unlike typical air-to-ground missions where pilots received target coordinates and engaged at their discretion, this operation required constant coordination with ground forces who might be in close proximity to enemy positions. Commander Reynolds personally observed each simulation, noting how pilots responded to changing tactical situations and unexpected complications. During her third simulation run, Sarah faced a scenario where the SEAL team became pinned down by enemy fire while evacuating civilian hostages from the target building. She had to provide close air support without endangering the friendlies or the civilians, all while managing fuel consumption and avoiding enemy air defenses. The stress was intense, but Sarah found herself falling into a focused mental state where everything except the immediate tactical problem seemed to fade away. Commander Reynolds watched her performance with particular interest. While other pilots had struggled with the multi-layered complexity of coordinating airstrikes with ground operations, Sarah seemed to intuitively understand the SEAL team's needs. Her communication was clear and concise, her target selection was precise, and her timing was impeccable. More importantly, she demonstrated the flexibility to adapt her approach when the tactical situation changed without warning. The psychological evaluations were equally rigorous. Military psychologists interviewed each pilot extensively, probing their motivations, stress responses, and ability to function effectively in life-or-death situations. They were particularly interested in how pilots handled moral ambiguity, since the mission might require making difficult choices about acceptable levels of risk to civilian populations in order to neutralize a significant threat. Sarah's interview lasted over 3 hours and covered everything from her childhood experiences to her most challenging combat missions. The psychologist wanted to understand what drove her to volunteer for dangerous assignments and how she processed the stress of knowing that her decisions could result in casualties. They were looking for signs of recklessness or excessive risk-taking that might compromise mission safety, but also wanted to ensure that selected pilots wouldn't freeze up when faced with morally complex targeting decisions. Between the formal evaluation sessions, Sarah had opportunities to interact with the SEAL team members on a more casual basis. She was impressed by their professionalism and attention to detail, but also struck by their genuine concern for minimizing civilian casualties during operations. These weren't the stereotypical special operations soldiers portrayed in movies. They were thoughtful professionals who understood the broader implications of their actions. Master Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, Commander Reynolds' senior enlisted advisor, took particular interest in getting to know the pilot candidates. His 20-year career in special operations had taught him that successful missions depended as much on personal compatibility as technical competence. He needed to know that the pilots selected for this mission would integrate seamlessly with the SEAL team's culture and operational methods. During one conversation, Rodriguez shared stories about previous joint operations where personality conflicts between air and ground forces had complicated missions unnecessarily. He emphasized that successful integration required mutual respect and understanding between different military specialties. The pilots needed to appreciate the unique challenges faced by ground forces operating in hostile territory, while the SEALs needed to trust that their air support would be there when needed. The technical briefings continued throughout the selection process, with each session revealing additional layers of operational complexity. Sarah learned about the specific weapons loads that would be available, the communication protocols that would be used to coordinate strikes, and the backup plans that would be implemented if the primary mission profile became impossible to execute. Every detail had been carefully planned, but everyone understood that no plan would survive intact once the mission began. Commander Reynolds conducted personal interviews with each pilot candidate during the final phase of selection. These weren't formal evaluations, but rather conversations designed to assess intangible qualities like judgment, leadership potential, and the ability to remain calm under extreme stress. Sarah's interview took place in Reynolds' temporary office, a Spartan room with maps covering every available wall surface. The commander's questions were direct and challenging. He wanted to know how Sarah would handle a situation where she had to choose between protecting his ground team and avoiding civilian casualties. He asked about her worst day in combat and how she had learned from the experience. Most significantly, he wanted to understand what motivated her to volunteer for a mission that carried such exceptional risks, with no guarantee of recognition or reward. Sarah answered each question honestly, drawing on her experiences from previous deployments and her understanding of military ethics. She explained that her primary motivation was the opportunity to prevent attacks against innocent people, even if it meant putting herself in harm's way. She acknowledged the moral complexity of the mission, but expressed confidence in her ability to make sound decisions under pressure. As the selection process neared its conclusion, Sarah reflected on how much she had learned about both herself and the nature of special operations. The integration between different military specialties required a level of trust and mutual understanding that went far beyond normal operational cooperation. Success would depend on every team member's ability to anticipate the needs of their colleagues and adapt quickly to changing circumstances. The final selection meeting took place in a secure conference room deep within the base's intelligence facility. Commander Reynolds sat at the head of a polished table, surrounded by his senior team members and the base commander. The pilot selection files were spread before them, each representing hours of evaluation and careful consideration. Sarah waited with the other candidates in an adjacent room, the tension palpable as they anticipated the results that would determine their immediate futures. When Commander Reynolds finally emerged from the meeting, his expression was unreadable. He had made his decision based on a complex matrix of factors that went beyond simple flying ability. The selected pilots would need to integrate seamlessly with his team's operational culture, while maintaining the highest standards of precision and reliability under combat conditions. The margin for error was non-existent, and personality conflicts or communication breakdowns could prove fatal for everyone involved. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as Reynolds called out the names of the selected pilots. The first name belonged to Captain Morrison, a veteran pilot with extensive combat experience in urban environments. The second selection was Lieutenant Commander Hayes, known for her exceptional skills in precision targeting and close air support operations. When Sarah heard her own name called as the third selection, she felt a mixture of pride and apprehension that reflected the magnitude of the responsibility she was accepting. The three selected pilots were immediately escorted to a specialized briefing room where they received their first detailed look at the actual mission parameters. High-resolution satellite imagery covered every surface, showing the target compound from multiple angles and at various times of day. Intelligence analysts had compiled detailed information about enemy defensive positions, civilian population patterns, and potential escape routes that the target might attempt to use. Commander Reynolds personally conducted this briefing, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had planned and executed countless similar operations. He explained that the terrorist leader they were targeting had been responsible for multiple attacks against American personnel and was actively planning additional operations that could result in significant casualties. The intelligence community had identified a narrow window of opportunity when the target would be vulnerable, but that window was closing rapidly. The mission profile was unlike anything Sarah had previously encountered. The SEAL team would insert via helicopter under cover of darkness, approach the compound on foot, and attempt to capture the target alive if possible. The three aircraft would maintain holding patterns at different altitudes and locations, ready to provide immediate support if the ground operation encountered unexpected resistance. The urban environment meant that any airstrikes would need to be executed with surgical precision to avoid civilian casualties. What made the mission particularly challenging was the sophisticated air defense network that protected the target area. Enemy forces possessed both radar-guided and heat-seeking surface-to-air missiles, along with anti-aircraft artillery that could engage low-flying aircraft. The pilots would need to use terrain masking and electronic countermeasures to avoid detection while remaining close enough to provide effective support if needed. Sarah studied the intelligence briefings with intense focus, memorizing every detail that might prove relevant during the actual mission. The target compound was located in a densely populated neighborhood, where distinguishing between combatants and civilians would be extremely difficult. Nearby buildings included a school, a medical clinic, and several residential structures that could be occupied by innocent families. Any targeting decisions would need to account for these factors while still providing effective support for the ground team. The weapons selection process involved careful consideration of collateral damage potential versus effectiveness against hardened targets. The aircraft would carry a mixed load of precision-guided munitions, including small-diameter bombs designed to minimize blast effects and laser-guided missiles capable of penetrating fortified structures. Each weapon had been selected for specific tactical scenarios that might arise during the mission. Training exercises began immediately, with the pilots and SEAL team members working together to develop the timing and coordination that would be essential for mission success. Sarah found herself impressed by the SEALs' detailed knowledge of air support capabilities and limitations. They understood exactly what her aircraft could and couldn't do in various tactical situations, and they planned their ground operations accordingly. Commander Reynolds proved to be an exceptional teacher as well as a combat leader. During training scenarios, he patiently explained the ground team's perspective and helped the pilots understand how their actions would be perceived by forces operating at street level. This mutual education process was crucial for developing the trust and understanding that would be necessary when split-second coordination meant the difference between success and failure. The most challenging training exercises involved scenarios where the original mission plan became impossible to execute. Sarah learned to adapt quickly when intelligence proved inaccurate, when enemy defenses were stronger than expected, or when civilian populations complicated targeting decisions. These exercises tested not only technical flying skills, but also decision-making abilities under extreme stress and uncertainty. Communication protocols were practiced until they became second nature. The pilots needed to understand the SEAL team's tactical language and respond appropriately to various codes and signals that indicated changing ground conditions. Similarly, the SEALs needed to provide clear and concise information about their requirements while operating under combat stress in hostile territory. During one particularly intense training scenario, Sarah found herself providing close air support for a SEAL team that had become surrounded by enemy forces in an urban environment. The simulation required her to engage multiple targets simultaneously while avoiding damage to nearby civilian structures. Commander Reynolds observed her performance closely, noting how she prioritized targets and managed her weapons systems under time pressure. Master Chief Rodriguez worked directly with the pilots on understanding small unit tactics and how air support could be most effectively integrated with ground operations. His experience in multiple combat theaters provided valuable insights into the practical realities of coordinating between different military specialties during high-stress situations. Sarah appreciated his straightforward teaching style and his willingness to share hard-learned lessons from previous operations. The psychological preparation was as important as the technical training. Military psychologists helped the team process the moral complexity of their mission and develop strategies for dealing with the stress that would inevitably accompany such a high-risk operation. They discussed scenarios where team members might need to make difficult decisions about acceptable levels of risk to civilian populations in order to accomplish their primary objective. As the training phase neared completion, Sarah felt increasingly confident in her ability to contribute effectively to the mission's success. The integration between the pilots and SEAL team had developed into a cohesive unit where each member understood their role and could anticipate the needs of their teammates. The countless hours of preparation were about to be tested in the most challenging environment possible. The final mission briefing would take place in less than 24 hours, and Sarah knew that everything they had learned during the selection and training process would soon be put to the ultimate test. The terrorist leader they were targeting represented a clear and present danger to American interests, and stopping him was worth the exceptional risks they would all be taking. The final mission briefing began at 400 hours in the most secure facility on the base. Sarah arrived to find Commander Reynolds already studying updated intelligence reports that had arrived during the night. Satellite imagery showed increased activity around the target compound, suggesting that their window of opportunity might be even narrower than originally anticipated. The terrorist leader's security detail had been reinforced, and there were signs that he might be preparing to relocate to a more secure location. Sarah took her position at the briefing table alongside Captain Morrison and Lieutenant Commander Hayes. The three pilots had developed strong working relationships during their intensive training, but tonight's mission would test their ability to function as a coordinated team under actual combat conditions. Each pilot had specific responsibilities that were critical to the overall mission's success, and failure by any individual could jeopardize the entire operation. The updated intelligence painted a more complex picture than their previous briefings had suggested. Enemy air defenses had been strengthened with additional surface-to-air missile systems positioned around the target area. More significantly, intercepted communications indicated that the terrorist leader was aware of increased surveillance activity and might be planning to leave the compound within the next 12 hours. The mission timeline had been compressed, leaving less margin for error than anyone would have preferred. Commander Reynolds addressed the assembled team with his characteristic directness. The ground insertion would proceed as planned, but the SEAL team would have a shorter window to complete their objective before enemy reinforcements could arrive. The three aircraft would need to be prepared for more extensive air support requirements than originally anticipated, including possible suppression of enemy air defenses and close air support in a heavily populated urban environment. Sarah reviewed her updated mission cards, noting the additional targets that had been identified through overnight intelligence gathering. Several buildings near the compound were now suspected of housing enemy fighters who could interfere with the SEAL team's extraction. The weapons loads on all 3 aircraft had been modified to provide greater flexibility in engaging these new threats while maintaining the precision necessary to avoid civilian casualties. The weather forecast added another layer of complexity to an already challenging mission. Cloud cover would provide some concealment for the aircraft during their approach, but it would also complicate targeting and increase the difficulty of maintaining visual contact with ground forces. The pilots would need to rely heavily on their electronic systems while remaining prepared to engage targets using visual identification if their sensors were compromised by enemy jamming. Master Chief Rodriguez briefed the team on the latest intelligence regarding civilian populations in the target area. Recent refugee movements had resulted in increased numbers of non-combatants in buildings adjacent to the compound, making precision targeting even more critical than usual. The SEAL team had developed contingency plans for evacuating civilians if the tactical situation permitted, but the pilots needed to be prepared for scenarios where immediate air support was required, despite the presence of innocent bystanders. The mission timeline was precisely choreographed, with each phase depending on the successful completion of previous phases. The aircraft would launch at staggered intervals to avoid detection by enemy radar systems, then establish holding patterns at predetermined locations. The SEAL team's helicopter insertion would commence once the pilots confirmed that the airspace was clear of enemy interceptors, and that defensive systems had not detected the approaching aircraft. Sarah's specific role involved providing overwatch for the compound's eastern approaches, where intelligence suggested enemy reinforcements were most likely to arrive. Her aircraft carried a mixed weapons load optimized for engaging both vehicles and personnel targets, while minimizing collateral damage to nearby structures. She would also serve as the communications relay between the ground team and the other aircraft if primary communication systems were compromised. The briefing included detailed discussions of various contingency scenarios that might arise during the mission. If the SEAL team encountered stronger resistance than expected, the aircraft would need to provide immediate close air support while coordinating with each other to avoid friendly fire incidents. If enemy air defenses proved more effective than anticipated, the pilots would need to adapt their tactics to continue providing support while minimizing their exposure to surface-to-air threats. Commander Reynolds emphasized the importance of maintaining situational awareness throughout the mission. The urban environment meant that tactical situations could change rapidly, with enemy forces potentially using civilian structures for cover or concealment. The ground team would provide continuous updates on their tactical situation, but the pilots needed to be prepared to make independent decisions based on their overhead perspective of the battlefield. The psychological aspects of the mission were addressed with the same thoroughness as the tactical elements. The team psychologist reminded everyone that high-stress combat situations could affect decision-making abilities and perception. She provided specific techniques for maintaining mental clarity during intense periods of activity and emphasized the importance of clear communication between team members when stress levels were elevated. Final equipment checks began immediately after the briefing concluded. Sarah inspected every system on her aircraft with meticulous attention to detail, knowing that mechanical failures during the mission could have catastrophic consequences for both her and the ground team. The weapon systems, navigation equipment, and communication gear all received thorough testing to ensure they would function reliably in the challenging environment they would soon be entering. The pre-flight briefing with the maintenance crew revealed that all 3 aircraft were in optimal condition, with no mechanical issues that could affect mission performance. Fuel loads had been calculated to provide maximum loiter time, while maintaining sufficient reserves for unexpected tactical requirements. The electronic warfare systems had been programmed with the latest threat parameters based on intelligence about enemy defensive capabilities. As Sarah completed her preparations, she felt the familiar combination of anticipation and focus that preceded every combat mission. The months of training and preparation had brought the team to this moment, and she was confident in both her own abilities and those of her teammates. The mission they were about to undertake was among the most challenging she had ever faced, but she believed they had the skills and coordination necessary to succeed. The final weather update confirmed that conditions would be marginal but acceptable for the planned operation. Cloud cover would provide some concealment during the approach phase, but visibility should improve over the target area by the time air support became necessary. Wind conditions were within acceptable parameters for precision weapons delivery, though pilots would need to account for gusts that could affect targeting accuracy. Commander Reynolds conducted final individual consultations with each team member, ensuring that everyone understood their specific responsibilities and was mentally prepared for the challenges ahead. His conversation with Sarah focused on her role as communications relay and the critical importance of maintaining contact between all elements of the operation. He expressed confidence in her abilities while emphasizing the gravity of the mission they were about to undertake. As the team prepared to deploy to their aircraft, Sarah reflected on the intensive preparation that had brought them to this point. The integration between the pilots and SEAL team had evolved into something approaching telepathic understanding, where subtle changes in voice tone or brief tactical updates conveyed complex information about evolving situations. This level of coordination would be essential for navigating the challenges that awaited them in hostile territory. The flight line was eerily quiet as Sarah performed her final pre-flight inspection under the cover of darkness. Ground crews moved with practiced silence, their red-filtered flashlights creating pools of crimson light as they completed last-minute checks on all 3 aircraft. The tension was palpable, but it was the focused tension of professionals preparing for a mission they had trained extensively to execute. Every person on the flight line understood the stakes involved and the precision required for success. Sarah settled into her cockpit and began the systematic startup procedures that would bring her FA-18 Super Hornet to life. The familiar sounds and vibrations of the aircraft's systems coming online provided a measure of comfort in what would soon become a very uncomfortable situation. Her hands moved automatically through the checklist items while her mind focused on the mission parameters and the various contingencies they had rehearsed during training. The communication check with the other 2 aircraft confirmed that all systems were functioning normally. Captain Morrison's voice came through clearly on the secure frequency, followed by Lieutenant Commander Hayes confirming her readiness status. The 3 pilots had developed their own shorthand communication style during training, allowing them to convey complex tactical information with minimal radio chatter that could be intercepted by enemy monitoring systems. Commander Reynolds' voice crackled through Sarah's headset as the SEAL team reported their readiness for helicopter insertion. The ground team had completed their final equipment checks and were preparing to board the specially modified aircraft that would carry them into enemy territory. The coordination between air and ground elements had reached the point where each component of the operation could anticipate the needs and actions of the others with remarkable precision. The first phase of the mission proceeded exactly as planned. Sarah's aircraft launched first, followed by the other 2 at carefully timed intervals designed to minimize the radar signature visible to enemy defensive systems. The night was clear with scattered clouds that would provide intermittent concealment during the approach to the target area. Navigation systems functioned perfectly, guiding the aircraft along predetermined routes that avoided known surface-to-air missile sites. As they approached the operational area, Sarah switched to her assigned holding pattern and began the patient work of monitoring enemy activity while remaining undetected. Her position provided excellent visibility of the compound's eastern approaches, where intelligence suggested reinforcements were most likely to appear. The infrared sensors painted a clear picture of activity patterns around the target, confirming that the terrorist leader was indeed present at the expected location. The SEAL team's helicopter insertion went smoothly, with Commander Reynolds reporting successful deployment at the planned landing zone, approximately 2 kilometers from the target compound. Sarah monitored their progress through periodic position updates while maintaining constant surveillance of potential enemy reinforcement routes. The urban environment below showed normal patterns of late-night activity, with no indication that the enemy was aware of the approaching special operations. Team Sarah's first indication that the mission was developing complications came when Commander Reynolds reported unexpected resistance during their approach to the compound. Enemy sentries were more alert than intelligence had suggested, and the SEAL team had been forced to eliminate 2 guards to maintain their element of surprise. This meant that the timeline for completing their objective was now compressed as other enemy forces would eventually discover the missing sentries and raise an alarm. The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly when the SEAL team reached the compound's perimeter. Instead of the lightly defended facility described in intelligence briefings, they encountered a well-prepared defensive position with multiple enemy fighters occupying strategic positions throughout the building. Commander Reynolds immediately requested air support, but the presence of civilians in adjacent structures complicated targeting decisions significantly. Sarah found herself thrust into the most challenging flying situation of her career. The SEAL team was pinned down by enemy fire from multiple positions, but engaging those positions required precision strikes in an urban environment where collateral damage could result in civilian casualties. Her training kicked in as she analyzed the tactical situation and began identifying targets that could be engaged safely while providing effective support for the ground team. The first air strike Sarah delivered was a textbook example of precision targeting. Using a small diameter bomb, she eliminated an enemy machine gun position that had been preventing the SEAL team from advancing toward their primary objective. The weapon's reduced blast effects minimized damage to surrounding structures, while effectively neutralizing the immediate threat. Commander Reynolds immediately reported that the strike had been successful and requested continued air support. Captain Morrison engaged a second enemy position moments later, using a laser-guided missile to destroy a rooftop sniper who had been targeting the SEAL team from an adjacent building. The coordination between aircraft was seamless, with each pilot maintaining awareness of the other's targeting priorities to avoid conflicts or friendly fire incidents. Lieutenant Commander Hayes provided overwatch while the other two aircraft engaged their targets, ready to provide immediate support if additional threats emerged. The enemy's response to the airstrikes was swift and more sophisticated than intelligence had predicted. Surface-to-air missiles began launching from concealed positions throughout the area, forcing all three aircraft to begin evasive maneuvers while continuing to provide support for the ground team. Sarah found herself simultaneously managing defensive systems against incoming missiles while identifying and engaging enemy targets that threatened the SEAL team's mission. The most critical moment came when Commander Reynolds reported that they had located the terrorist leader, but were unable to complete the capture due to heavy enemy fire from a fortified position within the compound itself. The target was attempting to escape through a predetermined route, but enemy fighters were providing covering fire that prevented the SEAL team from pursuing effectively. Sarah realized that a precision strike would be necessary to eliminate the defensive position without harming the high-value target they needed to capture alive. Working with information provided by the ground team, Sarah identified the specific room where enemy fighters were positioned and calculated an attack angle that would neutralize the threat while minimizing risk to both the terrorist leader and any remaining civilians in the area. The strike required perfect timing and unprecedented precision, as the target was less than 50 meters from the SEAL team's position and even closer to several non-combatants. The laser-guided bomb Sarah delivered struck exactly where intended, eliminating the enemy defensive position while leaving the terrorist leader's escape route blocked, but not destroyed. Commander Reynolds immediately reported that the strike had been successful and that his team was moving to apprehend the high-value target. The coordination between air and ground forces had reached a level of precision that even their most optimistic training scenarios hadn't fully anticipated. However, the mission was far from over. Enemy reinforcements were now arriving from multiple directions, and the SEAL team needed continued air support to reach their extraction point safely. Sarah could see vehicle convoys approaching from the east exactly as intelligence had predicted, but in much larger numbers than expected. The tactical situation was becoming increasingly complex, with multiple threats requiring immediate attention while the ground team remained vulnerable during their extraction phase. The next few minutes would test every skill the team had developed during their intensive preparation, as they faced the ultimate challenge of executing a successful extraction under heavy enemy pressure in an urban environment where every decision carried life or death consequences for both the SEAL team and innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. The final phase of the mission tested every aspect of the team's training and coordination as enemy forces converged on the compound from multiple directions. Sarah maintained her position overhead while engaging the lead vehicles of an approaching convoy, using precision strikes to disable their advance without causing unnecessary destruction to surrounding civilian infrastructure. Her weapons were running low, but she calculated that she had sufficient ordnance remaining to support the SEAL team's extraction if she managed her resources. Carefully, Commander Reynolds' voice carried new urgency as he reported their successful capture of the terrorist leader, but also indicated that enemy reinforcements were arriving faster than anticipated. The SEAL team was moving toward their primary extraction point, but they would need continuous air support to prevent being overwhelmed by superior numbers. The urban environment worked in their favor by providing cover and concealment, but it also limited their mobility and created multiple avenues for enemy forces to approach. Undetected, Sarah coordinated with Captain Morrison to establish overlapping fields of fire that would protect the SEAL team's withdrawal route while conserving ammunition for the most critical threats. Their months of training together paid dividends as they automatically adjusted their positions to provide mutual support without requiring extensive radio communication that could be monitored by enemy forces. Lieutenant Commander Hayes moved to intercept a flanking force that was attempting to cut off the extraction route entirely. The terrorist leader proved to be more valuable than even intelligence estimates had suggested. During the brief firefight at the compound, the SEAL team had recovered documents and electronic devices that contained information about planned attacks throughout the region. Commander Reynolds transmitted this intelligence to higher headquarters, while his team continued moving toward the extraction point, knowing that the information they had captured could prevent numerous future casualties. Sarah's most challenging moment came when she identified a group of enemy fighters positioned near a school building, preparing to ambush the SEAL team as they approached the extraction zone. The building showed signs of civilian occupation, with several families taking shelter from the ongoing firefight. Engaging the enemy position risked civilian casualties, but allowing the ambush to proceed would almost certainly result in American deaths. Working directly with Commander Reynolds, Sarah developed a solution that demonstrated the precision and coordination their intensive training had made possible. Using her aircraft's advanced targeting systems, she identified a narrow window where she could engage the enemy fighters without endangering the civilians sheltering in the adjacent classrooms. The strike required perfect timing and unprecedented accuracy, but it successfully eliminated the threat while protecting innocent lives. The extraction helicopter arrived precisely on schedule, despite the deteriorating security situation throughout the area. The pilot had navigated through increasingly hostile airspace, while coordinating with the 3 fighter aircraft to ensure safe passage to the pickup point. Sarah provided overwatch as the SEAL team loaded their captured terrorist leader and recovered intelligence materials onto the aircraft under enemy fire from multiple directions. Captain Morrison engaged the most serious threat to the extraction helicopter, destroying an enemy truck-mounted anti-aircraft gun that had been preparing to target the vulnerable transport aircraft. His strike came at the last possible moment, as the enemy crew was already tracking the helicopter and preparing to fire. The coordination between all 4 aircraft during this critical phase represented military aviation and special operations at their absolute finest. As the extraction helicopter lifted off with its precious cargo, Sarah and her fellow pilots provided escort coverage while the aircraft climbed to a safe altitude. Enemy surface-to-air missiles continued launching from hidden positions, but the combined defensive systems of all 4 aircraft successfully defeated every incoming threat. The months of training in electronic warfare and mutual support tactics proved their worth as the small formation fought its way clear of hostile airspace. The return flight gave Sarah time to reflect on what they had accomplished during the mission. The terrorist leader they had captured was responsible for planning attacks that could have killed hundreds of innocent people. The intelligence materials recovered from the compound would allow authorities to prevent future attacks and capture other members of the terrorist network. The mission had succeeded beyond even the most optimistic expectations, but the success had required every skill they possessed and coordination that bordered on telepathic understanding. Commander Reynolds' after-action report praised the exceptional performance of all 3 pilots and specifically noted Sarah's ability to provide precision air support in an extremely complex urban environment. Her strikes had been instrumental in allowing the SEAL team to complete their primary objective while minimizing civilian casualties despite the challenging tactical situation. The integration between air and ground forces had achieved a level of effectiveness that would become a model for future joint operations. The debriefing sessions that followed the mission revealed just how close they had come to facing even more serious complications. Intelligence analysis of the recovered materials showed that the terrorist leader had been planning to relocate to a much more secure facility within 48 hours. If the mission had been delayed by even a day, the target would have been beyond reach, and the planned attacks would have proceeded as scheduled. Sarah learned that her performance during the mission had attracted attention at the highest levels of military leadership. The precision and judgment she had demonstrated while providing close air support in an urban environment represented exactly the kind of capability that special operations forces needed from their aviation support. Several senior commanders had specifically requested her participation in future high-priority missions. The captured terrorist leader provided extensive intelligence during interrogation, leading to additional operations that disrupted terrorist networks throughout the region. The documents and electronic devices recovered from the compound revealed planned attacks against American facilities, diplomatic personnel, and civilian targets in multiple countries. The success of this single mission had prevented casualties that could have numbered in the thousands. 3 months after the mission, Sarah received formal recognition for her exceptional performance during the operation. The citation accompanying her decoration specifically noted her ability to provide precision air support while protecting civilian lives in an extremely challenging tactical environment. More importantly to Sarah, she knew that her actions had contributed to preventing terrorist attacks that would have caused immeasurable suffering. The professional relationships she had developed with Commander Reynolds and his SEAL team continued long after the mission concluded. The mutual respect and understanding that had developed during their intensive training and successful operation created bonds that transcended normal military cooperation. They had shared an experience that demonstrated the extraordinary results possible when different military specialties worked together with complete trust and coordination. Years later, Sarah would look back on this mission as the defining moment of her military career. The challenges they had faced and overcome had tested every aspect of her training, judgment, and skill as a combat pilot. More significantly, the mission had shown her the profound impact that individual actions could have on preventing violence and protecting innocent lives around the world. The terrorist network they had disrupted never recovered from the loss of their leader and the intelligence compromise that followed his capture. Subsequent investigations revealed that the planned attacks would have targeted schools, hospitals, and other civilian facilities in multiple countries. The precision and courage demonstrated by Sarah and her teammates had quite literally changed the course of history by preventing these atrocities from occurring. Commander Reynolds continued leading special operations missions for several more years before retiring to train the next generation of special operations leaders. He often used their joint mission as an example of perfect coordination between air and ground forces, emphasizing how mutual respect and understanding between different military specialties could achieve results that neither could accomplish alone. The mission had become legendary within special operations circles as an example of what was possible when preparation met opportunity.